Are there ways to avoid that recency bias for a coach when they set up the evaluation system?
All young kids that start playing youth sports, 70% of the kids stop by age 13. And guess what? Little Billy never made the team, and the parents said, hey, why didn't our little Billy make the team? Hey, it wasn't good enough. Well, prove it. We're doing everything with pen, paper, and clipboards like they had always done. And in the case of ball, they were measuring things like hitting, infield, outfield, bunting, and speed. I'm thinking, boy, there's a lot of problems here. Because by adding it up at a fifth, you're assuming everything's equally weighted in terms of importance. And that's just not the case. Every organization would say that they are concerned about developing athletes. They should be, because that's kind of the whole job of the sports organization.
Today, we are joined by Neil Anderson, the founder of SkillShark. He is a pioneer in youth sport technology and has taken an engineering mindset and applied it to the chaos that is often experienced by many in the tryout process. Neil, you've helped thousands of coaches turn what is usually a stressful trial experience for both the organizer and the athletes as well into a legitimate teaching moment. And we're thrilled to have you here. I know we were just chatting before about difficulties in different sports. So I'm super excited. Welcome to joining us and sharing your insight on how we look at talent. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here, Barry. Thanks for asking me to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited. Well, let's start off kind of curious, thinking about like how thinking of the system approach of what you've designed and how organizers think about these metrics. What are like non-negotiable data points, components that you think that coaches, scouts, et cetera, should be looking at and tracking, maybe even before the athlete gets on the field, the ice, whatever, what are things that like early, pre-early prep data they should be thinking about before they begin their tryout process?
Pre-early prep data, we actually have playbooks for different sports going over exactly these kind of things. So going over what should your thought process be before you even have the tryout? Things like prepping on, do you have the right equipment, the appropriate? A big thing I'd say is that many groups underestimate, if it's the first time you're running an evaluation, how much time it takes to actually evaluate X number of metrics per kid when you only might see them for 5 minutes each, right? So when people see that you can measure things a lot easier using an evaluation tool like SkillShark, they kind of get excited and they kind of sometimes go overboard as to how many things they want to measure without realizing, hey, I've only got this kid for 5 minutes on the ice or on the field. Am I going to be able to measure 15, 20 things? So kind of balancing that out. So just kind of using a little bit of visualization as to the day of the event. How many evaluators do I need? How many helpers do I need running the drills? That kind of thing. And also allowing things like, now that I'm going to be using my phone or tablet to evaluate the kids and taking videos, adding comments, what if somebody shows up and their phone is only barely charged? So you got to have power packs and that kind of thing, but it's all about being prepared.
Right. So, and then I'm curious, I'd love to, learn a little bit more about, when you're thinking about information that coaches are collecting, and they might be concerned with, not being too biased for recent information, where sometimes it's like the last play they saw, or the last action, let's say in baseball might be a sprint that the athlete does, or whether it's a play. Are there ways to avoid that recency bias for a coach when they set up the evaluation system to help them make sure that they're looking at more of the whole athlete and the whole tryout experience rather than just, because oftentimes in interviews, it's like the last thought you have of someone, you're like, oh, that was an A+ move. I'm gonna grade them in, A+, even though it's like, well, the whole set of data. How does SkillShark approach that? How should coaches think about that?
Yeah, boy, there's a number of things I can think of how SkillShark is used for that benefit. So a few things would be our weighted reports. So all these things that you might measure during a tryout, they're not necessarily just equally weighted to each other, right? Depending on what you're looking for. So in SkillShark, you can create weighted reports saying, yeah, I'm trying to find my best infielder. So I might weigh his or her hitting at 60%, their infielding at 30%, and their speed at 10%, whatever it is that the data that you're gathering. And then based on that recipe, it'll show you who your top infielders are. And if you ran outfield drills, but you're looking for the infield, you don't even include the outfield scores in the equation, because what do you care? You don't really care what they did in the outfield. You're looking for your best infielders. Other things that we do, and you mentioned about evaluator bias. Now, this is probably one of the biggest advantages of SkillShark. So being an engineer by background and kind of a data nerd, I'll admit it, I'm a data nerd. We use something that very few other products on the market use, and that's called normalized data. So imagine, Barry, that you and I are evaluating a bunch of kids at a tryout. I'm going to give you the nice guy hat. So you're that nice guy who, out of 100 kids, the lowest score you give on, let's say, their hitting mechanics is a 7, and the highest score you give out of 100 kids is a 9. Me, on the other hand, let's say I'm measuring their infielding ability, and the lowest score I give, hey, I'm gonna call it like you see it kind of coach, and I say, hey kid, welcome to life. You are terrible. I'm gonna give you a 1. But if a kid's really good, I might give as high as a 7. The problem with Excel and paper tryouts, one of the major problems, is that when you put your numbers and my numbers into a spreadsheet, I now have a much greater effect on a kid's outcome than you, only because I used a bigger range. Because if you average those two scores, my scores have a much greater effect than yours. If I thought a kid was terrible and gave a 1, the kid's average is destroyed. Whereas if you thought a kid was terrible and gave a 7, the average is barely touched. So in SkillShark, we use normalized data. For every metric, we take the lowest score and the highest score for that metric, and we make that the 0 to 100 range. If we do that with all the metrics, and then you add them to the recipes, you and I have the same net overall effect on a kid's outcome.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That sounds like a great way to make sure that the information's understandable and usable for the organization. That you're right, because there's so many different ways that a coach, scout might assess different individuals. I'm curious, like kind of thinking of like errors that teams and coaches typically might make if they try and do things on their own. What are those, things that it's you're right, you kind of found a way to solve around. And not that you have to give away your full playbook, Neil, but like what are other, you're thinking of like things that they might not, they could be doing better when, when it comes to, obviously they're trying to define success and what are your thoughts?
Boy, because we make the gathering of data so effortless and easy for organizations now, there's a whole lot more other things that you can do. And I'm speaking as a coach now, coached for a lot of years, ball coach, because I played ball for the majority of my life until my knees couldn't take back catching anymore. Speaking as a coach, and I know there are many people that would agree on this topic, that something that I think has been lost for a long time, and it's a very hard thing to get across, not only to the kids, but more importantly, the parents, is coachability and understanding, it's not all about wins and losses. It's about developing these kids to be better people and being open to receiving feedback and listening, right? So rather than the organization grade the kid on something like coachability, leadership, team attitude, when they're on the bench, are they sulking or are they cheering the team that is on the field? In SkillShark, we have a tool called the self-assessment. So you can go out and ask the kid to assess themselves and write it out like a complete question. Like, how would you rate yourself willing to listen to the advice of the coaching staff on a scale of 0 to 10? And it makes the kids and the parents think, hey, if that is being asked by the coach, it's probably pretty important and something they're looking for. How do I respond to that kind of thing? And it's a very subtle way to get across your coaching philosophy or your sport organization to the key people.
That's terrific. Yeah, it sounds like a really great way to teach the athletes and connect them to what coach expectations probably are going to be. I'm curious though, kind of challenge. Do coaches, scouts ever like, but I want to assess them? I tell you.
You can do that too. Sure. Yeah.
And how's that pan out? Have you seen, I don't know if you've looked at it, like, do coaches have preferences on like that type of, like the self-assessment versus the coach-driven scout assessment?
Well, in SkillShark, you can do both, right? So it makes for a great conversation piece. The coach might evaluate that kid, but not show the score until the kid assesses themselves. The coach gets to see what's going on inside the kid's head, and then they can have a discussion saying, hey, you graded yourself here. I put yourself here, and here are the reasons why. And then they can have a discussion about it and try to correct the thought process going on. It's a very, self-assessments are amazing. It's an amazing way to get your philosophies across. We also have national sport organizations that will go out, and the self-assessment they'll use as kind of a pre-tryout. So they'll have kids who are trying to compete at the national level. They'll say, hey, submit us a YouTube link to your highlight reel, to some game footage, put in your stats of your height, vertical, that kind of stuff, depending on what the sport is. And then, yeah, the sport organization can kind of sift through all that data and decide who they want to invite to the national camp and who they don't.
That's cool. Yeah, I can see that's a great way to kind of low effort, still some effort, but low effort way for them to,
Yep.
these busy organizations to just gather some important data. Curious, going back to you were talking about like the reflection, like the being able to teach and have a connection between the athlete and the coach. How do you, when you think of like the value of the data, when you're comparing for teaching versus judging, like assessment versus development, the
Yeah.
dichotomy where there's like a tryout feels very much like a just assessment, like judging. You're getting you're pass go or don't pass go, or team A, you're no team B, team, etc. There's categorization, but not as much training. But I can tell in what you're talking about, there is development. I'm curious how you view,
Yeah.
like Shark's role and just general philosophy, even beyond SkillShark, the
So,
value of that data.
yeah, great question. So one of the, like, I'd say this is a huge differentiator for our product over anything else on the market is developmental resources. So every organization, even if it's just for a tryout, they should have, I think every organization would say that they are concerned about developing athletes. They should be, because that's kind of the whole job of the sports organization, to develop the athletes, not only to be better players, but better people. So self-assessments helps on the character side of thing. For the skill side, one of the things that we have in SkillShark is called developmental resources, where you can set up rules. For example, let's say, Barry, your sport is soccer, and you have a tryout, and you're grading a kid on something subjective like their ability to make a tackling move on the ball. So in SkillShark, you set up the rule saying anyone who scores lower than blank out of 10 on tackling automatically gets assigned an age-appropriate video that the org deemed appropriate, and it gets put at the bottom of the kid's report card in a section called recommended resources. Now put yourself in the shoes of the athlete or the parent who probably, if they've been involved with organizations who have been using nothing but pen and paper, they've never received any feedback on how the kid did, let alone developmental videos on what drills the kid needs to work on to improve the most. That just hasn't been done. So yeah, it's an amazing thing that it's primarily used for our customers on the academy side. When they see kids on a regular basis, they can just, and it's just automatically assigning those developmental videos.
That's awesome. Yeah, you've got they're able to support them. And you mentioned, I was kind of curious. I know we talked about the coach and athlete, and you brought up the parents. So I'm kind of curious what you've seen, or how the role of the parent with the data, with the information, the report, but also just the role of the parent in with the team, with the, how are they? So there's part like, yep, they're obviously, I assume oftentimes it might be their email that gets the report or whatever, but then, so they're, what they're getting, and then how are you seeing them interact with the organization that's paying you, I assume, and how, and how, because I imagine you're getting feedback. What's that like? What's the parent dynamic like?
Yeah, I would say, now I'm not going to put all the parents in one bucket. There are definitely the outliers, which we'll call passionate parents, that are maybe a little bit overboard on, it doesn't really matter what information you send them. They always think their kid is going to be the next superstar. But I'd say the vast majority of parents fall into the bucket of, hey, I don't know the sport as well as you do, coach. Just tell me what I need to work with my kid on the weekends, and I'll do it. Like, they want the best for their kid, but they sometimes don't even know what question to ask the coach because they don't know the sport that well. So with SkillShark being able to easily provide report cards, developmental videos, that kind of thing, it provides parents far better direction than they've had. So I'd say the vast majority are very appreciative for receiving feedback. And the one common thing that we hear just this morning for somebody that booked a demo on our website, they made mention that they have this growing call by the parents for data transparency. And that is absolutely not going away. Like parents are expecting that if they take their kid for tryouts, they want to see your justification for why the kid made team A, B, or C. And that's never going to go away. It's only going to get more and more prominent. And SkillShark allows you to do that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You're right.
One story I'll share with you, and this goes back to when we were first getting started, Arizona Diamondbacks. So it was early when we were getting going, and I got a call on a Saturday morning, and he said, "Hey, I'm so and so from the Arizona Diamondbacks." I'm thinking, sure. I thought I was getting punked at the time, but no, they said, "Hey, any chance you can be down in Phoenix?" And yeah, matter of fact, I happened to be going down there in 2 weeks. So yeah, just hopped on a plane and got to see their training facilities down there. It's awesome experience. When there, they shared a story saying like they were doing youth camps, and they shared a story about this coach in Washington who was just a high school coach, your typical high school team. And he did things by the eye test, no pen and paper, even just, yeah, you're good enough to be on my team. You're not. And guess what? Little Billy never made the team. And the parents said, "Hey, why didn't our little Billy make the team?" "Hey, it wasn't good enough." "Well, prove it." He didn't have anything to back it up. So the parents sued the school. And guess what? Little Billy's playing for the team, and in a very confrontational kind of way, because there was nothing to back up the decision. And there again, with SkillShark, you can say, "Hey, little Billy didn't make the team because he was ranked 87th out of 90 kids on these 3 skills. And maybe you need to work with them if you want them to compete at a higher level."
That's cool. Yeah, you're right. I mean, feedback is so important for, like you said, whether it's for you implementing it in your development, as part of these learning protocols that you guys have built, or feedback just to know why,
Yeah.
like, did someone not like me, or yeah, I just am not capable at that level. So
Yeah.
that's great. I love that you guys do that. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
I've got time for as many as you want.
Okay, one's about. So I want to share this. So you founded SkillShark in Saskatchewan, and yes, I know they've got. I don't know if you follow football. I know CFL's there, and there's you've got known for curling and hockey, a variety of great sports. Curious, how did the culture just influence how you think about what you've built? The user experience and what you've built with SkillShark. How how is starting there? And I know you work I imagine across across North America, maybe across the globe, but yeah, thinking about kind of just your local roots. How has it influenced you?
Yeah. It's definitely been a fantastic experience coming from, a farm background, then going into engineering, that kind of stuff. It's been a very rural upbringing, but to make a product that is used around the globe, Czech Republic, country of France, London, China, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and across all North America and Canada. In Saskatchewan and Canada, we have a ton of users that probably some of the earliest adopters of new technologies. So it's gone pretty well that the technology has kind of flourished where we are. And regardless of where we are, not only for our local customers, but everybody on the globe, we've always strived to have not only the best product, but the best support. And I think you'll see that in the Google reviews that you see from our good customers. There's nobody in the market really that touches our product. It's the most full featured and the best support of anything out there.
Yeah, no, it seems incredible. And I kind of on that note, you talked about your background in engineering, being in traditional engineering role, and now a tech CEO in sports. Curious, what was the moment? When did you realize, thinking of when you were, early days of starting up SkillShark, when you realized, there are these missing pieces and action. What hit? How did the lightning hit you? Yeah.
Here's exactly how it happened. So my engineering background was process control. So I did almost 30 years of my engineering career focused on process optimization of industrial facilities. So any place that had a smokestack, there were utilities. I worked for a very large multi-billion-dollar automation company that did process optimization. Doesn't matter what your process was, we could help you optimize things better. And then I took over the ball program in the city where I'm from, and took it over from some incredibly knowledgeable coaches with national titles under their belt. And they said, we'll run the tryouts the very last time to show you how it's done, and then we'll hand the reins over to you. And they were doing everything with pen, paper, and clipboards like they had always done. And in the case of ball, they were measuring things like hitting, infield, outfield, bunting, and speed, giving a kid a score at a 10 on each of those, adding it up at a 50, and then ranking the kids from best to worst. I'm thinking, boy, there's a lot of problems here. Because by adding it up at a 50, you're assuming everything's equally weighted in terms of importance. And that's just not the case. But that's what they were doing because it was just that was the simplest way. So I said, hey, leave it to me. I'll take the numbers and I'll put them into a spreadsheet. And in the end, I also realized, kids, when you were growing up, Barry, playing sports, did you ever get any feedback professionally saying, here's what you did well, or here's what you need to work on?
Yeah, never. Yeah.
And the primary reason is it's too darn hard when you're using pen, paper, and spreadsheets to give that back individually to each kid. It takes way too much time. So I made this mother of all spreadsheets that you could press a button on the Excel spreadsheet and it would run a macro to spit out a single page PDF for each kid saying, here's where you scored, here's where the group average was. And showed it to one of my assistant coaches, and his chin dropped and he's like, holy, we have the same problem in hockey. Have you ever thought about making this an app? And I thought, I hadn't. And then I checked around. Hockey, basketball, soccer coaches, they all have the same problem. Huge data entry consumption times and being able to do very little with the information. And that's kind of how SkillShark was born.
That's incredible. And then you got me thinking kind of slight, you mentioned optimization. So I'm curious if you have a hack or a tool that you use, but then besides SkillShark personally, like it could be, it doesn't have to be a sports tech thing. Just what do you use that you can't live without? Is there a technology or tool or methodology to optimize your own life or your own work or whatever it might be? I'm curious. Yeah. Is there something that you're like,
let's see. On the sports tech side, I got to say, I love Pocket Radar. We have an integration with them that works incredibly well. You just set up the Pocket Radar, have it externally charged, and brings in velocity so effortlessly into SkillShark. Work-wise, the latest AI tool that our group came across was a tool for meetings called Granola. I don't know if you've ever used it, but it's amazing. Rather than just transcribing notes like Gemini might do, which just gives you a script at the end, which is, not exactly useful. If you tell it ahead of time, hey, I'm going into this type of meeting, it will structure the data the way you want it structured, regardless of how the conversation flowed. So it's pretty impressive.
Oh, that's cool. I've not. Yeah. I'm like, I've heard of AI and transcription, which Gemini here will do, but that's a cool one. Yeah, wow. That's impressive. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah.
And then I've got one final. I know I told you a few questions back though. So like one more final one. Thinking back on your own playing days, your journey as an engineer, an entrepreneur and CEO now. But if you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice on to the athlete, on handling evaluations and pressure, what would it be? Because I think about and I agree, getting the feedback's important, but there's also this fear of, I don't know what that feedback's going to say. So what advice would you give to someone who's going to be coming through a SkillShark assessment, and the athlete, the family, they're coming through it,
whether they're using SkillShark or a group that's using pen and paper. If there's kids and parents putting their kid through the triad process, my biggest recommendation, without a doubt, is you don't always have to make the eight. There's so many parents that say if they don't make the A team, then it's they feel like it's a reflection on them, and it's kind of like a slap in the face for the parent. Whereas if that kid just barely makes the A team, they are far better off to be on the B team and get far more playing time and develop, rather than going on to an A team where they don't get as much playing time and they won't develop as much. So the recommendation is, it's about the kid having fun and staying in sports and trying to dissuade this real statistic that very few parents even know. And that's of all young kids that start playing youth sports, 70% of the kids stop by age 13. And in the top reasons for that, and this is where SkillShark helps, the number 3 reason is they don't have any confidence that they're playing the sport well. So speaking as a coach, all that verbal reassurance I might give a kid throughout the season about how they're doing and how they're getting better, when they hop in a mom and dad's minivan at the end of the practice or the game, 98%, if not 100, is lost because they're thinking about other things. They're thinking about social media pressures, bullying issues, problems at home, exposure to drugs through their circle of friends. There's so many things that distract a kid today, even relative to when you and I might have been playing sports. That's it's far tougher to get through. So giving concrete feedback, keeping them on that right path, and trying to impress upon them they don't have to make an A team to have a successful season.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame. You're right. I think setting expectations is a huge part. You're right. And like sometimes people they're creating their own pressure. This has been really a fantastic conversation, Neil. I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with me and the athletes and coaches that'll be watching this. And what's a good way for them to get more information about SkillShark?
Yeah, so on our website, skillshark.com, just go on there and at the very top, click book a walkthrough. And our team will set up your free trial account. And that night, if you wanted to test things out without spending $1, you could play around with things and see how good the tool is and how it's going to save a ton of time and provide way better feedback than verbal conversations from a coach.
Yeah, no, you all heard. I mean, it's true. Everything Neil shared. It's the value of data. And I know, yeah, SkillShark and Neil are incredible advocates for leveraging data. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. You bet.